So my name is AnneMarie Anderson, and thank you for having me so much. I'm really excited about Beyond the Mind and your mission. And my company, Education, I founded 3 years ago as a result of very similar goals to match families with resources, being tutoring or school choice navigation or school advocacy, and really identifying those resources that matched the needs that the student had. And also, of course, that becomes a family affair and supporting the parents. And I also do consultancy in the schools to help the schools accommodations coordinators identify what resources within the school are being either underutilized or misutilized, and dusting off resources that aren't being utilized and moving them into motion, or also repurposing resources that are being misused to leverage their resources to offload some pressure from teachers, offload some pressure from administration, and also streamline communication and bring the student into that communication and training so that they learn the vocabulary that is being used about them and make it work for them.
Oh, I love that. Oh my gosh, so much. Yes. So yeah, and I know you were starting to share your journey into education, like as a student.
Yes.
And what was your experience like?
I just, of course, parenting, is just reflections and flashlights just illuminating my own experience. And I remember very clearly growing up being incredibly interested in advanced topics for my age, and very sensitive to how I could easily see patterns in relationships around me. And words were very literal to me. If you say something, that's what you mean, and that's what I'm going to think is real. And that became very isolating as a student, because I didn't understand what was a light topic. Everything was easy for me to talk about, whether it was, where do we go after we die, to like bubblegum. It was the same.
Yeah.
I'm like, same. I can just go with whatever.
Yeah, I'm kind of the same, and I really embarrass my kids a lot with that, because I'll dive into something dark and they're like, "Mommy," I'm like, "What?" That person was open to like they didn't think it was weird, but my kids were like mortified.
So yes, and exactly. And then wanting, to be so curious about topics that I was learning in school. I loved advanced STEM and et cetera. But and that was all available in elementary school. As the gifted and talented kind of focus went away, I really understood more. I was just so much more focused on the struggle of social. And I quickly realized that I didn't have the skills to really connect with people without going deep. I felt like I don't know how people talk in terms of, just banter that people were used to. I couldn't read those cues very well. So I just kind of floated around and tried to avoid quizzical expressions from people. And so it was very lonely, and I had no idea what vocabulary to even use to express my experience. My family, I come from a neurodiverse family, and they have still very little awareness of their own vocabulary. And so there was no real mentorship there. And if there was, I probably wouldn't have recognized it either. So I really, learned so much going to undergrad and learning storytelling. And I was just fascinated with broadcasting and things like that, but I missed the STEM. And I worked in corporate Manhattan and played that chess game again, just sort of closing my eyes and faking it until I break it as usual.
Yeah.
And so that just, I could tell I was just burning out from
Yeah.
masking, and I didn't know what to call it, but I couldn't do it anymore.
How did
And
you,
yeah,
I was curious because you talked about kind of not knowing how to navigate small talk, and
yeah,
that's a little different from like when somebody says I'm allergic to small talk. I can relate to that experience because
yes,
I'm just so uncomfortable. I'm like, oh, my skin's itching. Like, can we just get to the
yeah,
good stuff? Like, who are you? You
yes,
know, like, so I can resonate with that. But you said it in a way that made you said you didn't quite know how to navigate it. So I imagine now you're in Manhattan and
oh,
you're, in this
yeah,
corporate world. Like, that's such a part of like your connections and getting your job. But you said fake it till you break it. So were you like shoving yourself through that experience, or how? Like, yeah, how
yeah.
did the small talk ish just show up at that stage in life?
That was a pivotal lesson that I learned very quickly. And in my first job, I went on a trip with my boss, and I was in sales, but slash investor relations for a telecom industry. All of it not, I can make anything interesting to myself, but
Yeah.
the people part of it, uh, uh, so we went on a business trip, and I didn't understand this either. It was a one company hosting a bunch of other companies, and it was kind of a wine and dine thing. And he asked me to work the room and learn everybody's names and what company they worked for. And I was just horrified. He's like, ready, go. And, I just didn't, I went about, it was like I learned how to just, in that second, I'm like, this is my job. I have nowhere to go there's nowhere for me to say, well, how do you recommend I do that? Or how, there was no consulting position or no coaching for
Yeah.
me. Like, go figure it out. And so I did. And I went around and hi, how are you? And I just kind of put on this complete show for myself and
Yeah.
experimented with the networking piece, which even saying that word makes me want to throw up.
Yeah.
Um,
It kind of sounds like
because
your survival skills kicked in and then you were like, there it was like, just do it. Is that what it kind of the experience felt
sorry,
like?
my what skills?
Like your survival skills, like if
Yes.
you're in the
Oh,
so
100%. And
yeah.
I did learn that from, I was a latchkey kid and really kind of feel like I raised myself in many ways and other things with my family system. So I learned how to do that really quickly out of, preservation. Um, so yeah, it was absolutely that. It was fight or flight, let's go. And I figured it out that night. And I'm like, oh, I get this. And there was a lot of, uh, you know, uh, appearances, things like fancy drinks and fancy clothes. And I'm like, so of course, as I'm going through this room, I haven't thought about this example in a long time, but as I'm going through this room, I realize I'm in a play and
Yeah.
it's all ridiculous. And none of these people could possibly care about what we're doing. Like, and yet I understood that it was a play or a game. And it was like, I wonder, an experiment. I wonder if I could do this and, get away with it kind of thing. And who's going to bust me for playing dress up at some point. And so that was a very clear, like a pivotal foundational memory for me of transitioning from, being in education to then being in business and, where words were not an indicator of caring for someone. They were not connecting with someone. They were purely transactional. So that was devastating to realize
Yeah.
that. And there was a lot of, fancy alcohol, fancy wine, fancy cocktails. And it made me wonder, I wonder if that's why drinking alcohol or some kind of mood altering substance is such a huge focus of these kinds of events, because it's truly unbearable for the human soul.
Yeah.
And we don't know how to socialize without it.
Yeah.
Especially in business, what does that look like? But so now I'm having all of those thoughts and I just need to get through the evening.
Yeah.
So yeah, that was rough. And that was baptism by fire for sure.
Wow. Wow. Okay. So you said, make it till I break it. So you're just kind
Yeah.
of in there and masking, you said.
Yeah. Exhausted.
Yeah.
But I felt also, and I don't know if this is, a healthy response, but I felt victorious that I could do it. And it was became very simple because it wasn't an interesting conversation and I knew how to get through it. And it, once you learn that skill, it's almost easier to abandon your real thoughts because it's
Yeah.
just, fluff and it's easy and it was just amazing to me that people were willing to have these conversations. And, this did not appear to be a real life to me at all.
Yeah. I think you just like articulated so much about masking in that,
Mm,
like there's like there's a reason we mask, right? Because the mask we put on can navigate your environment sooner, right? And that
yeah.
you figured out how to use that mask to make it work, and it almost feels easier to put on that mask and go than to figure out how do you do it without the mask on,
Yes.
and navigate. Yeah. It's
And I
like,
think that was the only time I had clear direction. It was like, just go meet. And maybe this was why it worked that one time instead of before in college and whatnot. It was like not, but, he said, go find out everyone's names and who they work for. And so because I had that clear directive, I'm like, oh, I know how to do that. I don't
yeah,
have to know them. I don't have to share with them what I think. I don't have to
right.
share with them how I feel or what it's like to be me. And I don't need to care what it's like to be them, which was always the most fascinating thing to me. But for the first time, I kind of could divorce myself from those interests.
Yeah.
And because in college I would go to a party or something and again, like I'm talking about the time space continuum, and then we're talking about beer the next second, and people's faces were just, I'm like, I just have this amalgam of the same expression I got
Yeah.
over and over again. And I looked like a fun girl, but when I opened my mouth, it was like, oh dear.
That's funny.
Like, yeah, that's got that again, So it was interesting to be in
Is it
sales.
is it the oh dear, like what part would come out, the brainiac or the sure we'll talk about beer kind of, like who's gonna show up?
Well, no, the beer part was super hard for me because the person I was talking to was usually talking about that. And I'm like, well, that's
Okay.
cool. But, then about philosophy and ugh, I don't know. I mean, literature and poetry and how do leaves work with chlorophyll? And it just, it didn't work.
Okay. Okay. Yeah.
But I
But later
loved,
you learned to ask, it sounds like.
yeah,
Later.
then I figured out the mask. If somebody had told me literally, like, when you go to a party, talk about beer, I could have done it.
Yeah.
But nobody it was like I had to have that specific instruction. Otherwise, that's so funny to reflect on now. If somebody had just given me like a list of, what to discuss at the party, that would have been amazing.
Yeah.
So
I
much
hear what
easier.
you're saying. I hear what you're saying, because I feel like there was a lot when I was just learning to navigate life that was confusing, because it was like, oh, you should, you want to show about people and get to know your authentic self. But then I'd go into the work environment and I'm like, but I'm using those skills. Like, why is it not? It like, and you say, like leadership says this is so important. So it's like, it was just so literal, but I didn't understand. Like,
Yes.
and if somebody would have said, no, show interest in order to engage them for the transaction to happen, that would have been more helpful than me to try to be like, I don't understand, like, how does this rule fit in here, but then it doesn't fit in over here, and how do you use all this? Like, yeah, it would have been helpful to be like, it's a tactic, like you don't actually really have to know that, like, it's just a tactic, and then I don't know, like, it would have been helpful.
Would be so helpful. We should create like a tool, like a little handbook,
Yeah.
when you go to a meeting, this is where if somebody, if I had just heard like where to put my focus and what was the objective truly, like, but how, not just get to know, work the room. I'm like, just that next level detail, like you're saying, would have been amazing. And like, it doesn't mean, everyone's shallow and you're amazing, because I would get super arrogant about my thoughts too, like, oh, this is the higher way of living. Blech. Anyway, so just super judgmental. And so I'm like, ugh, so if, we had like a little toolbox reference, like a quick, okay, when you're going into a party, here are 3 things you can ask people.
Yeah. I love your reactions that you're having, because I had a little bit of that too. I was like, no, I really care about people, and I really do, and I did, but then I also didn't have boundaries to be like,
I know. What are those?
So like this, it's like the scaffolding and the structure would have been really helpful, because I feel like that's the thing. It's like when we're trying to figure out like the social intelligence, the emotional, like kind of those dynamics. It can be confusing, right? And I know I was reading books, but then I'm like, but I'm trying the book in this environment without realizing like, oh, no, maybe you can use that for the after dinner cocktail, after the conference, but not for the, I don't know, the day-to-day, like happy hour at work. Like, like there were just little nuances in that it was like constantly having to experiment and be like, and then internally, I think there was like some rules being refined, It's like literally, just tell me what to do.
It was so hard. Like you were saying that, and it was funny. I was just talking to the executive director of the Neurodiversity Chamber this morning about some keynotes and workshops that we want to do. And I learned so much from an executive at Google at the Stanford Summit I went to the breakout Q&A and I said, how do you know when words actually mean what they're saying?
Yeah.
Like, this is a safe environment. Okay. How do you know that's true? Because some of it is just compliance language and some of it is practice.
Yeah.
And when, they say, oh, get to know each other, authentic conversation is really important. Boy, that can mean a lot of different things.
Yeah.
And so I'm like, how, I feel like I need a bodyguard to interpret things and then give me direction, so that I don't get in my own way.
Yeah. Yeah.
And or expect that what they're saying is true. And in a practice that I understand, I think I've taken it for granted too, that I understand what people say because I'm speaking English, they're speaking English. Like, I think that can't assume so quickly what people mean. And that's really hard because my brain goes so fast and I have all these thoughts, and I love, like, my conversation with you, like going off our energy and our ideas and
Yeah.
our questions and curiosities and my awkwardness. And I love that so much. And then when I
Yeah.
have to like go in slow motion,
Yeah.
I wonder if that's where the burnout comes, because it's just like, oh my gosh, this is so hard. And it feels lonely and discouraging too, So with education, my reflections on my own upbringing and then my kids navigating the school system, private, public, charter, it's all a bit similar in that, we have accommodations in place, we have 504s and IEPs, and however, operationally,
Yeah.
school systems and individual schools and charter schools, it's almost kind of like an infrastructure problem and an understanding problem, where the system itself just cannot support what it wants to support
Yeah.
in terms of actually delivering, resource provision. So instead of thinking of it as accommodations, where that means a compromise or a lower standard, really the goal should be resource provision that results in actual progress and children accessing curriculum for
Yeah.
themselves. So to do that is a very individual process. And yet there's a system that cannot be individual. There aren't enough human resources to make that happen.
Yeah.
And also it costs an inordinate amount of money for families to pursue that. And there are also a lot of wolves in sheep's clothing specialists that support neurodiversity in education, and yet they are neurotypical clinicians. And so yet another kind of placebo is put in place that doesn't deliver, and more discouragement, more money. So I
Yes.
wanted to come alongside students and can do so. My approach has been, and I contracted with a tutoring company for a while first because I just wanted to see if, supporting other people's kids was in my wheelhouse or not.
Mhm.
Um, and it just, one kiddo at a time, really started working. And so then I started researching the methodology of what I was doing and why it was working scientifically and neurologically and sociologically. So that's where the presentation at Stanford came from. And my approach is to use subject specific tutoring. So it's non-threatening, like, okay, we're going to do a math problem. Okay, we're going to do some English composition. Okay, we'll do some chemistry. Okay, we'll do some whatever's in front of them that they, are struggling with. And I utilize that to do just deep observation of that kiddo and how they interact with their paper, how they interact, why I started the pencils thing. And what I do is I have each kid, before we start, we have to play with blocks, or I bring several different kinds of blocks, markers, and a coloring book, or Legos to build with. And they get to choose, and I play alongside them. They don't have to interact with me, and then we
Okay.
just talk while we're doing those things. And then I ask them what writing utensil they would like to use. And they usually have a worn out nub of a pencil or a pen that's barely hanging on. And I bring a lot of writing utensils, different shaped pencils, different kinds of pens, and have them write their first name on a piece of paper specifically to connect with who they are on a piece of paper with each writing utensil, and to really observe which one they prefer.
Yeah.
And that begins the process in a very, safe way of developing the ability to even identify that they have a preference is huge. That's a very difficult thing to identify, that they can have a preference of writing utensil. First of all, if they're masking and just trying to survive, and they can start people, and it's a human thing, at least in my experience, to wonder, do I have a preference? What is within my control? Where is my choice? And
Yeah.
children, a lot of times, especially that are in accommodations and whatnot, they're micromanaged all day. They suffocated. And their choices usually end up, don't do that anymore. You can't have that. Or, and especially in, with they're using computers so much for homework, they have lost the neurological benefits of writing on paper with their hands and connecting the information with emotion in their brain, and they're, including more and more senses into this learning process.
Yeah.
Because when it's disconnected, of course, that will, a digital interaction with information is not education. That's consumption. And it's very disconnected, and it's very transactional and performative. So I want to reintegrate curiosity about
Yeah.
themselves and identifying that they have needs to begin with, then working through those subjects to be able to start articulating what those needs are. First, by communicating, I'm uncomfortable. Then, what does that experience feel like to them? Then, what do you need right now? And then identify around them what resources are available right now for free, right in front of them, so that they don't have to be a different kid with different abilities in a different school with different parents to meet their needs. And that is everything.
That is everything. Like literally you were
So,
saying,
yeah.
you as an individual, like your needs are like, okay, you're giving them the agency. And it's so brilliant how you do it, because it's like what's such a small thing is pick the pencil, pick the pencil that I know in our exercise you just had pencils out. And you had ones that just had obviously different writing styles, different weights, like different like ridges around them, and I think just from my own lived experience, like I might not have really understood the importance of that, but like, I don't know, I think I told you this at the summit, like my son has had some challenges with writing. So like for him, that's a huge sense of agency to be like, pick the one you like, right? Because there's some like lower confidence than there with like just having to use the basic standard number 2 pencil that the school requires, right? So it does, I think, give this permission, like your needs are okay. Like we see, and your needs are totally okay. And they might not be hearing that in
Yes.
so many facets of their life, right?
And they're taught as I was taught. I wasn't taught with direct words, but you're taught through lived experience that, deny your needs. They
Yeah.
aren't what fits. So adapt, disappear,
Yeah.
adjust, and perform. And that is a very, that can be interpreted in so many different ways in terms of self-worth and, that cognitive dissonance of highly valuing other people and themselves, and yet being dismissed over and over and over again. And it also takes away the pressure from the school system. The student doesn't have to wait for the system to read their mind in order for them to articulate what they need. A lot of my students know that they have a 504 or an IEP, and their posture is waiting for the teacher to know what to do either, okay, now I know, it's a very generic like checklist of, oh, I have time and a half for tests. If I need a sensory break, I raise my hand. And, that's pretty much it, which is a huge ask for teachers when they have 20 to 30 students.
Yeah.
So for the teachers to have that in place is kind of amazing. However, the hamstring comes where there is no follow-up with each individual teacher. These accommodations are going to work a different way with every teacher because we talk about learning styles being individual. Teaching styles are also very individual.
Yeah.
Textbooks were written by another person with a different writing style that's also very individual. So we don't acknowledge the miracle it is if a teacher and a student connect.
That's so true. Yeah.
And so I'm like, this is not just a you thing. Like, imagine the odds, that your
Yeah.
teacher, this human being that you don't know, and you at this very point in time are going to connect information to education, with
Yeah.
emotion that makes sense with your perception of the world. I mean, come on. And I'm like, however, that doesn't mean you're not, then they'll fill that in. I'm just not a math person. I'm just not a reading person. I'm just not a science person. I'm like, okay, well, you've adopted that, you've concluded that, right? How that's a form, that's your math. I say, that's your math. This plus this equals I'm not that.
Okay.
I'm like, maybe. Okay. So that's so far. Let's test that theory. Like, is 1 + 1 2? Okay. Is this plus this that? What if there were like a lot of teachers on YouTube that teach that concept in a way that you understand
Yeah.
with maybe a different textbook or no textbook? Maybe they teach math with music. Maybe they do geometry with, manipulatives in the real world. Maybe you go build a coffee table and learn about physics. Like, there are a million ways. So now that's your job. Because we have the internet and because you have other teachers and because you are a curious person and you are the most important person for you to know ever, let's go. Like, let's find what does click. We opt, and that's where the strengths-based from Stanford is so awesome. It's like, okay, we've got all this intel about what doesn't work.
Yeah.
That's very valuable. That does not equal necessarily rejection of you. That means we're closer to what does. Process
Yeah.
of elimination, like, woohoo. Okay, so things that don't work equals no problem.
Yeah.
Doesn't mean there's something wrong with you. It might mean something's right with you. Like, hey,
Yeah.
who says the system is the ultimate authority? So, however, we are in the confines of the system. So let's work within those confines to identify what your choices are and make them yours. Education is 24/7. It is yours. So,
Yeah.
yeah.
What I love your approach because you're teaching it's a skill like metacognition, right? Like the big picture thinking, like seeing your what is it like the expression I use is like look from the Hawkeye view down, like you are one
Yes.
piece of this difficult puzzle, right? But that's a skill that um especially folks with like ADHD, that's an executive function skill, so it might be lacking. And so I
Mhm.
think that's important that like you're teaching that because I mean I know like in a work environment that I was in, like I was getting like this great feedback from leaders, like my leaders, my leadership, and I was getting great feedback, and then and then things change and the uh, team evolved, new boss, like all of that, and all of
Oh,
a sudden
yeah.
it wasn't great feedback, and I remember I was sitting with my therapist of been like, oh my gosh, like I don't understand, like what am I doing wrong? Because I was doing all the same stuff, and but now I'm not getting good feedback. And like I was just beating myself up because I'm like I could not figure it
Mm,
out. And I mean because I didn't have the skill to understand why it was happening to know, okay, now we have a different leader. Actually, this leader's leadership style and teaching style is very different. And it's
Wow.
a style that is very confusing for me because the way that my former leaders would teach was more like teaching, like focusing on the craft and how to focus on it. And this person's style was more like situational. And so um, like I was just hearing rules that were inconsistent all the time. So I was confused because I was like, wait, well, last week
Oh, that's so
we said this.
hard.
But I think without the skill of like what's happening in my world around me,
Mm-hmm.
I was beating myself up and beating myself up, and like having had learned that skill through my own journey, like now I'll sit there and I'll do that with my kids where I'm like, okay, here you are in this system. Like this is, your teacher's in charge of this and you're in charge of this. And um, it's been such a helpful tool to be like, yeah, just like you said, like it's not you. Like it doesn't mean you're broken. It doesn't mean you're doing it wrong. But the lack of effectiveness towards what you want is information, right?
Yeah.
And how
And
to use.
enjoying being you in the process is so
Yeah,
pivotal and essential to learn how to enjoy yourself
yeah,
in the midst of all of these constraints and limitations and uh, confusion and policy versus practice. And there was one of the speakers at the summit that said common sense is not always common practice,
right. Yeah,
and that drives me insane. I'm like, so it's, I just want to believe so badly that, the institutions that are in charge of our well-being are interested in our well-being.
yeah,
I think that should be a thing. And when it doesn't happen, it feels like this existential crisis, literally so on repeat my entire life. I'm always surprised as if I've never experienced disappointment before, ever. It just takes so much energy to recover from that disappointment. And yet at the same time, that's the skill of acceptance and living in reality that is not perfect
yeah,
and not looking for safety in perfection. I think that has been huge to help myself and my students and my kids and my marriage and all of it to be, perfection. And I guess that black and white thinking does not deliver security and safety.
right.
What does is enjoying myself and having the pause to have the metacognition. Sometimes I need a bodyguard. I need my husband. I was just in a recent conversation with an organization that is very neurotypical and very like confusing to me because they, the leadership, one leader style is very empathetic, very inclusive, very yes, 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 championing differences and diversity of all neurology and everything else. The person who is her authority is absolutely about, legal compliance and CYA and very, just neurotypical, vanilla, straightforward. This is no empathy, no connection
Yeah,
required. So I was in a situation where I was trying to comfort, the leader that was more neurotypical. And I always misunderstand that honesty and forthrightness is comforting to some people. Total miss on that. And she just wants the bottom line. And if you are too honest, you basically that gets weaponized against you.
yeah, yeah. I had
And
to learn that
that
too.
I can't tell you how many times I keep running into that room and I keep just thinking it's going to be different. And it's the same thing, expecting different results. And I feel like an absolute silly fool, but I just am having a real hard time learning that.
Yeah, I feel the same. I really struggle with that too, or um, I think having to learn, actually, most people don't want honesty, or like directness scares a lot of people, and like
Yep.
for me, it's funny because I have a friend, we always joke this is just our Sagittarius fiery energy, because she's like, I love your directness. And I tell her, I'm like, I love your directness. Like, to me, it feels really safe. Like, I would rather know what is on your mind than
Yeah,
like be
like
trying
where
to
do I
figure out,
stand?
yeah. Or like then they're trying to be like, okay, but this is your action and these are your words, and they're like so disconnected. And then, it's like trying to figure out, it's like, just say it. Like, just say it and deal with it. Like, let's just do that, Like,
Exactly. Yes.
um, yeah, that's so hard. So, I mean, I just love that, like, part of what you're teaching in like students figuring out how to advocate for themselves is actually teaching like a lifelong foundational skill, especially in a system where um, the accommodation can feel like a nuisance, like, I mean, I think, I don't remember if I shared, but my daughter uh, has had to get some accommodation. She has was sick last year and got diagnosed with a chronic illness, and so we're still working through that. But it's mind boggling, like the amount that she has to remind, or the way that we have to protect our privacy, to be like, actually, you don't need to know her health issue, like her accommodations and space, but like
Mm,
there's so many, and some of it can be just like a really good intent, but also like I'm trying to teach her, like, you're allowed to have your privacy. Like, that's what this accommodation process is for. Like, we do not need to take your health records and disclose it all over the school. Like, you're allowed
oh
it,
my
and you
gosh.
choose how you do it.
Absolutely. And that is another conversation I'm going to have at the chamber is, the journey from psych ed eval or medical diagnosis to sharing with the school,
Yeah.
because there are no coaches out there. There's no help, even from the, clinician who did the evaluation. Here, just share this last page. That's what they need
Right.
to know about you. The rest
Right.
is subjective information that we can use in your therapy sessions, or to, if assess what you need outside of school. But that gets weaponized all the time, either to deny admissions, to create a case for expulsion, it just is absolutely heartbreaking. And I think that the clinicians are so, they do amazing things in so many ways, but there is kind of a, here you go, good
Yeah.
luck with that. And I would love for there to be a bridge, of advocacy and, you know, educating the parents. Like you said, the privacy thing. Wow. I mean, especially for neurodiverse people who are like, what are boundaries? And,
Yeah.
so that's critical, because I struggle with that a ton. If people are like, oh, well, what's going on with your daughter or your son? I way overshare sometimes. And I've gotten myself into trouble where it was like, that was none of their business. And I love having my husband there, because when I have the awareness to ask him to have that conversation, it's so much better. It's like, oh my gosh, because he's like, why are you talking to people you don't know about this stuff? I'm like, oh, I don't know, actually. It just sounded like a good idea at the
Yeah.
time.
I remember I was just talking with my daughter in the car. This was like a couple of years before her diagnosis, but I was just telling her about my day, and I was like, so anyways, I was at the physical therapist and we were talking about, and I was like, going on, and she just goes, oh, mommy, that is your physical therapist, not your therapist. Like, why are you talking to him about that? It's like, he brought it, we were having a great conversation. Like, there was nothing awkward, but for her, it was like, why would you be talking to somebody who's working on your ankle about like brains health and well, but she was just like, I don't know, I was like, I don't even understand this reaction. Anyways, back to the conversation he and I were having, like, but yeah. And so like, I've had to learn that because she is more private, and then like having to be like, okay, who's also young. So she has to have her own journey about figuring out her balance, but also knowing that
Yeah.
sometimes if you have, like, I mean, anybody with an invisible illness deals with this, right? And hers is a invisible illness, like they categorized it within the chronic pain category, but
Oh,
so she has to learn how to navigate it. But the thing is because there's not very much known about it, there's, she does have to deal with a lot of like intrusiveness or intrusive questions. And it's like, yeah, it's kind of hard because you also know that in order to keep yourself safe,
yeah.
you don't want to go into the nitty gritty, right? Like if she's just like, oh, I feel nauseous, people are like, well, why don't you chew some gum in class? And you're like, then you're having to over explain and be like, it's not that kind of nausea, like it's actually very debilitating. Like, you know what I mean? Like, and I think a lot of us don't learn that part of the communication of like, oh, actually, these are my rights, and I actually don't have to share. Like, I'm allowed to have my privacy and get help. Like, it's not an either or. It's not a trade
Oh
off.
my
Like, if I
gosh.
don't give up my privacy, so many of us are like, if I don't tell them what they want to know, I'm so scared they won't help me. And I think,
Exactly. And then at the same time, they're asking intrusive questions, not from a place of how can we help and match you with resources. It's
yeah,
from how do we protect ourselves from you?
yes,
And that
yes,
is something that I still don't want to believe. I think there's something in me that just can't accept that, which I need to work on because it's absolutely damaged my students, it's damaged my children, it's damaged me.
yeah,
And, in especially the great divide in between administration and teachers, the motive, and the reasoning and the mission for finding out what accommodations are needed are completely different. The teachers can come from how can I support you? And yet certain things they have to report to administration. Or if there's any trauma, which I don't know of any child who has not experienced some kind of trauma up to this point just because of the climate that we're in.
right,
Um, Even, the protocol that they use to keep kids physically safe in school cause trauma. They are traumatizing and stress inducing and also completely oppose the ability to connect with one another.
yeah,
And for teachers, they have to simultaneously care about their students and view them as a possible threat to their safety.
yeah,
Neurochemically, the two cannot go together. It's oil and water. So the teachers can't emotionally give their attention to these kids because they also have to be vigilant
yeah. But
and
I
then
just,
also connect them to a curriculum. So I guess the way that so many things are opposing one another and opposing success even from happening with a student that has no accommodations, that's a miracle. And then add any complication and nuance to that, I really do see that, it just comes back to, at first I felt like, okay, I'm going to help change the system. I will, advocate for policy change. I will, do I start a school? And I just started realizing that, what, these kids, the clock is ticking. They are this age once,
yeah,
and I want to help in time to benefit this kid, these parents. There
yeah,
isn't time. The Titanic, to get it to change course, is just too much. And I can't do it in my lifetime. But what I can do is empower and inform and train kids and their parents to develop the vocabulary of themselves so that for the rest of their lives, they can go into a situation, realize the limitations of that situation's ability to even advocate or help them,
yeah,
decide how much of it they need to participate in. To your point, the privacy thing, which I probably need to hire somebody else to help because I don't feel like I'm good at that, but I'm good at that for other people. And, to be able to move in and through the cracks of what is required in a
Yeah.
way that, first of all, the lowest bar doesn't harm them further,
Yeah.
and also creates hope and enjoyment and in discovering who they are and how the world works, how it all interacts with each other. So there isn't this nihilistic view of I have whatever I do doesn't impact anyone because nobody cares. They want me to be them and everything else has to go away. And then we wonder, why these kids are depressed and there's mental illness
Right.
spiking all over the place. And the very delivery vehicle that we've put in place is causing that kind of belief and experience.
Right. I fully agree. I mean, the beauty that I hear in the work that you're doing is when I put together like the pieces, the way it's looking in my brain is there's such a big element in your style that is giving kids permission for their needs and to say it
Mm,
matters. Like you are allowed to be unique. You are allowed to like what you like or need what you need. And then the other element you talked about with like the metacognition and understanding the school system. And
mm,
it's not, again, it's not you. Like, let's look at the system that you're in and how to navigate it. So there's like
mm,
skills then that they can use for their workplace or their college environment, or if you're navigating the legal system or um, anything else. But I think the third part of what I'm picking up from what you're saying is it's like giving them permission to be a leader in their
mm,
needs. I know when we were talking about the metacognition and the system part, I don't know if you said this, but I feel like there's this um, common understanding of anybody who has navigated a neurodiversity journey, or like in my daughter's case, an illness journey that just isn't like super well understood. Like it's not like, oh, you have a broken arm, we know what to do with that, right? Like, they don't have like the script for it.
mm,
I haven't met anyone who's like, you don't have the script for me, I'm going to sue you, right? I think everybody goes in there like, no, I get that you don't have the script for me. This, I'm having to learn a ton on the spot, but I'm willing to
mhm,
take and like partner here, right? So I think you're really giving them the permission to be like, let's look at the big picture and see how you are leading, even if like the teacher, the environment isn't wanting to see them as a leader. Like I see you have like these layers that you're building up in them. So at
mm,
least that mindset's there, and then there's acceptance of, okay, like I know with my kids, I have to be like, oh my gosh, sometimes, teachers just think the worst of students and they just think you're up to no good. Like, you know, just know it's not about you. You can't change everybody's mindset, like, but this is what's happening right now. So you're just gonna have to go in and be, like my daughter, we've had to work on like her being like, no, 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 I did read the book and I did do the practice things and I'm still coming to you for help. So please stop telling me to go back and read the book because I did do that, like don't just assume I didn't do the work, and like how do
yeah,
you like, then and then how do you accept that like in some cases like, yeah, you're not going to help me, so I'm going to have to go get my help from somewhere else, in order to get my goal met.
exactly. And, I think parents are under a tremendous amount of pressure because, I do think that we're all frustrated because we care, and that's what I say in my advocacy meetings. I'll have the head of school and the accommodations coordinator and the teacher all in the room, and the parents aren't there. I'm, kind of on behalf. And, we're obviously there because something isn't working. So I just start with that. I'm like, I just want to say thank you. Good job to everyone. We're all frustrated because we care a lot and we want to do a good job and we don't want to lose our job. And we understand all of the limitations with budget and, resources and hours in the day. So let's start there. Good job. We do have in common that we care about what we're doing and how we're doing it and is, also concerned. about figuring out how to get where we want to be from where we are. And,
Mhm.
that's been super helpful to relieve everybody in the room and just sort of, I was listening to this brain training guy, and he just talks about like changing your posture from being the thermometer and taking the temperature and following the temperature to being the thermostat, of your room and your environment, and
Oh, yeah.
setting the temperature and then arranging what you need. Like, when we set the thermostat, it's, or say we don't have the thermostat and it's summer and we want it cooler, we open the window and we open the door and we turn, or we put on a sweater, or we figure it out and adjust, multiple different things to set a temperature that works for us.
Yeah.
And, it doesn't have to be a consensus for us to achieve that. Now, it's not going to be optimal. It does include frustration and patience, which probably are the hardest two things to combine. Frustration, or I guess three: frustration, discouragement, and patience. Ooh,
Yeah.
tough. It's a big ask, on everybody's part, for sure.
Most definitely. Oh my gosh. I feel like I could just talk to you for hours, and I'm looking, we have about like 10 minutes left. And
Okay.
I would love to understand a little bit more about the books that you've written, because I've
Mm,
seen two on your website, but I'm not sure if I have missed anything. So just like tell us a little bit more about your published works.
mm,
Because I know that we chatted a little bit about your book, Brain Sex, A Thinking Person's Guide to the Sex Ed book. And I'm looking over
mhm,
here, and you also have Thrive, Academic Systems Workbook. So would love to
mhm.
hear about each of them.
Okay. So first, I think a universal approach that I'm realizing I take to everything is I usually create something out of a need that I see has gone unmet. So with brain sex, it really started with, I grew up in just sort of the typical suburban culture of, you see on many sitcoms. And there was a universal kind of sex ed curriculum. It was pretty, surface level, and then, you're on your own kind of thing and figure it out. So, and that was, was what it was. And then I grew up and did a lot of thinking about all of that, just, and made a lot of mistakes and just realized, I wonder what actually, is useful information in a sex ed approach as I had my own kids. And social media came out, and, all of the social and cultural questions about identity and orientation. And, my kids just had great, great questions about how do I even, what questions should I even be asking myself to discover these things? Or do I do experience and follow that reaction? All of these
Really
very
great
thoughtful
questions.
things.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I'm like, I have, I don't know. And, and I had my own questions about, a lot of information I didn't have about the very structure of my own body
Yeah.
and how that functions. I mean, it was kind of embarrassing, just even on a basic level. And Scientific American actually came out with the most beautiful uh, video, and it was an infographic that was 3D, and it just talked about how limited our anatomy and physiology books have been up
Uh-huh.
until, I would say, like 10 years ago. And that the structure of the reproductive anatomy on both genders is completely either just inaccurate blatantly or limited in,
Okay.
scope. So that was hysterical because the woman presenting the information had a very dry sense of humor about it, but it was like, ugh, I don't even know, why is there so much mystery around what is going on in my own anatomy?
Yeah.
Wow, that leads to a lot of bad decisions
Uh-huh.
on my part. So I started developing the resource I felt confident in to equip my own children and myself. I'm married to a man, and I had learned a lot of different things about sexuality in our marriage. And there are a lot of myths out there and assumptions. And I just wanted to know what I thought and did
Yeah,
I
I love
kind of take inventory. Like, yes, that resonates with me. No, that doesn't. This is within my values. No, that's not. What are my values? How do I figure that out? So I'm like, I don't know. So I just wanted to like wipe the slate clean.
Yeah.
And so I started doing a lot of research on the sexual experience, our reproductive anatomy, but also how it affects literally every cell in our body, and how we think about our sexual interactions with another person, with ourselves, with information, with all the different contraceptives that are available. Employing one has a different emotional impact than employing another, regardless of your beliefs background. And so it was fascinating to me. So then I was like, oh my gosh, I have never even thought about the brain.
Yeah.
And I don't think anyone is engaging in anything sexual or asexual without the brain. So I'm like,
Right.
even arousal or any concept of that. And so it was funny to me that very simple idea felt very revolutionary. So I just started researching also the myths around, is sexual experience heightened and better if you're, take a mood altering substance like, ecstasy or alcohol or marijuana. And I kind of threw out all of my preconceptions, and I was a little nervous that I would find out like, yeah, if you're, an addict, sex is so much better.
Yeah.
Because I used to be addicted to cigarettes and, all this stuff. So
Yeah.
it's like, well, I hope it's not better because that's not good for me.
Yeah.
I'm willing to go there. So it really became so beautiful. And the Huberman Lab podcast, actually, on his, neurology and things like that, became a huge inspiration, because when we behave in alignment with what is healthy for our neurology and neurochemistry, even with our sexuality and sexual practices and beliefs and ideas, it supports mental health.
Yeah.
And I, did research on what kind of sexual practices, beliefs, and behaviors cause mental illness and eating disorder, everything from like eating disorders, even erectile dysfunction and orgasmic dysfunction with, later in life when you engage in certain practices and beliefs and behaviors. And it was just so fascinating to then contrast that with some of our cultural experiences that, profess inclusion and health. And it has nothing to do with discriminating against orientation or identity or any of that, but the practice within those and how to become aligned with your values within whatever your identity journey and all of that. How to deploy and practice that in your life, it takes a lot longer than I would wish that it would, to reflect on and identify, what do I value in this practice for me as a whole? And actually, how do I come at anything that I decide in terms of my, intimate relationships, casual relationships? And how does that actually affect me neurologically and emotionally, and with my family background, and with, my cultural beliefs, and even,
Yeah.
our racial identity and our ethnic backgrounds. And I mean, this is very complicated. So I'm like, we can't one off this.
Right.
And my kids were feeling a lot of pressure to, identify and, kind of mine down their identity and their expression and relationships sexually, where it felt like the Russian doll, where you
Yeah.
take one off and it becomes smaller and smaller and smaller, where if they, added a letter to their acronym and then decided later that wasn't actually a fit, they felt so bad about abandoning that identity.
Oh, that's interesting. Wow.
And which makes sense. I mean, I get it. And they, they're deeply caring people, but so I just also was interested in reflecting on my own, yes, I happen to be married to a man. That doesn't always, I don't feel like that I need to even hang a hat on that. It's just,
Yeah.
are my behaviors going to reinforce the health of that relationship or not?
Yeah.
Because our arousal systems and all of that in our brains, they're going to change 6 ways from Sunday by like
Oh
3
gosh,
o'clock.
yeah.
So
Yeah.
I'm like, if I have to pick, an identity or hang my hat on something every time my impulses change or my attitudes change, that's exhausting. So I'm
Yeah.
like, I don't know how to do that. So I started there, and then I was like, but I do know how to just slow our roll. And the book that I wrote has no answers for anyone.
Okay.
It is a prompt of curiosity to train the reader. Like, if, do you know how to identify what your core values are when it's how you do your homework, or whether you're dating, or whether you're, engaging in sexual behavior and your family system, and just giving you prompts, and like, then decide that first, then engage,
Yeah.
in your schoolwork, then engage in your sexual preference identity and forming all of those things, and your gender identity and expression. And so I think instead of going from the outside in, let's practice inside out.
Yeah.
And so also I examined different websites that were recommending different, approaches to contraception and things like that, that then, when with further research from totally independent sources, contradicted that message.
Mm.
Physiologically and neurologically, where a lot of, that mental illness and expression of, either eating disorders or things like that from sexual trauma, a lot of what was being recommended was actually traumatizing.
Yeah.
And more of a consumption transaction, and then you objectify yourself. And so it's just been a really amazing journey where I narrowed it down to just 26 pages of, hey, nobody's having sex without a brain. I mean, last I checked. So you can't really argue with that.
Yeah.
And arousal comes from our brain. Everything does. So that's encouraging because we have more in common. Let's start with what we have in common
Yeah.
and identify values. We should all slowly identify our values, and with flexibility as we grow up. We should all kind of go through this process, very much like education, developing your own vocabulary without, yes, take into consideration culture. Yes, take into consideration what your experience is in your own body, and yet don't throw out what's important to you to feel whole in yourself.
Yeah.
Don't throw out basic anatomy that is common for every person. Um, and, you know, but really value, I guess, that initial piece for a lot longer time than we want to, if that makes sense.
It does. I'm so loving hearing about like the thoughtfulness that you put into all your work. Like, I can't wait to check out the book, but my kids are definitely at the age where I think it would be a great conversation piece. But oh, did you freeze? Did you
Oh, I
freeze?
got you.
Okay, okay. Yeah, I love hearing about just the thoughtfulness that you've put into all of your work. It's really inspiring. And I'm just like resonating with what you said earlier about like your brain moving really fast. But I think you also have like the strong intuitive sense of like what is missing and needed. And then you like go back and like ground that into more of like a systems and logic and um, like structure behind it that probably makes it more consumable. Um, that's, I don't know.
Yeah.
Did
Well,
that
and
resonate?
I want to just, and you had said scaffolding earlier. This book is just a scaffolding for people to explore their own house.
Yeah.
And build their own house. It's not meant to prescribe. It is
Yeah.
meant to develop agency in a trustworthy way, um, and to train also to vet sources of information. And often where profit is, then it's not actually good for you.
Yeah. And I love that you brought in like joy into like navigating the world. Cause I just know like when I got divorced, like I took a while before I got onto any like dating apps. I was like, I just got divorced, and I'd been with
Mm.
my ex-husband. Actually, I met him when we were like in our teens, we just started dating young. But yeah, I was like, I don't even like first of all, I don't even wouldn't know if I would want to get married again. I don't even know what I would like. I don't even know. Like I don't even have it figured
Yes.
out.
Oh
And
my
then some
gosh.
people gave me the great advice. They were like, you know what? Why don't you just go have fun dating? And I was
Mhm.
like, yeah, why don't I do that? And I mean, since that time, it's been such freedom to not have it figured out.
Oh,
It's like
yes.
maybe one day I'll figure it, or maybe not, maybe, and it's like, it's okay. Like, so
It's
just setting the
totally,
scaffold, like, be like, here's just a little bit of structure, and then you get freedom within it, can be enjoyable, you know.
yes. And then
Yeah.
you get to create the structure that is healthy, and that you're sure of one piece at a time. And
Yeah.
I mean, we still do that. Like, I remember the day I got married. I never, I was fine not getting married. I was fine not having kids. And a friend of mine, which I'm not sure was the best pep talk the day of my marriage, but she was like, "Why are you getting married? Like, we've never seen any good examples of getting married." I'm like, thank you."
Yeah.
Anyway, I actually was grateful. I said, a totally fair point. Like, I may be having a wedding, right? We know the word wedding, and we know the word wife, and we know the word husband, and we know the word bridesmaids and all the things, but I that does not mean the same thing that from one day to the next. I refuse to, and I obviously was not perfect about this. I adopted a lot of conventional, ideas and put that pressure on myself and my husband, and had to grow up a lot with that and feel safe, to not know.
Yeah.
And yet in that conversation, I was like, I don't know what I'm doing. Like, we have
Yeah.
zero idea. There's not a lot of examples, even with people who've been married a long time, that we admire, that seem mentally well.
Yeah.
So I'm like, this, and same with being a parent, I don't know what good parenting looks like, except to be connected,
Yeah.
except, and not knowing is, I feel like, has been my best parenting days, is when I'm comfortable saying, oh my gosh, that sounds hard. I don't know.
Yeah.
Um, because that's courage. I'm afraid of failing all the things. And so, uh, when I don't rush into fix to relieve my own anxiety about whatever they're talking about, it's the best day. I'm like, I just have no idea. I'm so sorry, but I'm with you. And that sounds really scary. Um, but then also having my own boundaries, where I'm, with college application process right now. And, there are some attitudes that I'm like, you know what? It sounds like you would like some independence and handling this yourself. And
Yeah.
I am getting that in an indirect way, but this is not the way I want this relationship and these memories to go.
Yeah.
So what do you need? And then
Yeah.
it's great because they get to self-reflect and then go, oh yeah, I'm just, kind of cranky because I'm nervous. And then we get to talk about it.
Yeah. I'm writing that down. That's beautiful for my own notes with parenting.
Oh my gosh. And that's why, it does take a village and it's hard to find because, even in our neighborhood, I started monthly coffees for moms of younger kids because I'm like, good job, you're exhausted.
Yeah.
And, it's just whoever wants to show up in their sweats, I've got hot coffee that's free. and,
Sorry.
and they universally are lonely. And there are cliques like in 7th grade among the parents. And like you and I discussed at the beginning, they're just trying to figure out where they fit in. And it feels very similar to everything we grew up with.
Yeah.
And so I'm, an idealist. That's part of my friend calls it my optimism because
I love that.
I keep trying to, make a utopia a little bit, but I, invite grandparents so they can speak wisdom into these people and be like, you're going to be okay. Like you're standing upright and it's 9 a.m. Like that's a great start,
Yeah, you got this one. You're good. Yeah.
And just, but being, I have the benefit of clocking more minutes on the earth than they do. And I'm like, good job. Like however this morning went, like, good job.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh my gosh. AnneMarie, thank you. Like, I love, you shared so many pearls of wisdom. And I love like the thoughtfulness and the sense of agency that you like bring into all of the work that you've talked about. Like, I'm so excited to like follow your work and to hear more. And I know I want to get your education link and your Instagram link and all of that and put it in the show notes.
Thank
So we can
you.
continue to follow your work. But it's been such a joy. I, you know,
I just can't tell you how much I'm like, oh my gosh, I'm finally starting to find my people, if that's a thing,
yeah, I feel
Yeah.
the same way. I'm going to just hit stop recording. But
Yeah.